My life seemed perfect. You know that feeling when you think everything in your world is perfectly arranged, as if your path has been written by an ideal script? I had a brilliant career, the kind every young professional dreams of. I was climbing the ladder step by step, and my achievements were noticed even by those who usually kept their distance. I had a wife, my pearl, my support, my best friend. She was always there for me in moments when I doubted myself. She always knew how to find the right words. Her support was the thread that held me together, even when the world became heavy and challenging. Her smile, I thought it was my reward for all my efforts. And then there was him, my mentor, a man who was my ideal in the world of business. He was someone I respected more than anyone else. He shared his knowledge, his experience, showing me the path to success. "You have potential I've never seen in all my years," he once said. Those words meant so much to me at the time. I looked up to him as an example of who I wanted to become. He was the one who supported me professionally, helping me when I faced tough decisions. On the surface, I had it all: a loving wife, a successful career, the backing of a powerful mentor. Life seemed like a beautiful mosaic where every piece fit perfectly with the next. I couldn't have imagined that behind this facade lay something dark, something that was about to shatter this dream. But sometimes the best illusions break the fastest. And this mosaic, which I cherished so much, turned out to be fake. I had no idea that behind my back, those I trusted were already weaving threads of betrayal. They were playing their game, while I remained blind, convinced that everything in my life was in its rightful place. But can this last forever? I ask myself now, looking back. My perfect fairy tale was about to crumble into pieces, and I didn't even suspect how quickly everything would change. I didn't know that the darkest shadows always fall from those standing closest. Everyone, at some point, feels that strange, unsettling sensation when something seems out of place. At first, I tried to ignore it. "It's just a stressful period," I told myself. But small changes in my wife's behavior began pushing me toward the thought that things weren't as cloudless as I wanted to believe. She became somewhat distant. We used to spend hours talking about everything: our dreams, our plans for the future, how we'd go to Paris together for our 10th wedding anniversary. But now those conversations were gone. Instead, she was always busy. The dinners we used to enjoy together became short and quiet. Her phone started ringing more often, and she would answer those calls in another room, speaking so quietly that I could barely hear her voice. When I asked why she was coming home late so often, she would just sigh and say, "There are so many projects right now. You know how it is." And I believed her, because I wanted to believe her. But her eyes, they seemed to avoid me, as if she was afraid I might see something I shouldn't. And my mentor? He suddenly became too friendly. Our conversations, which had once been purely professional, even a bit dry, now had a strange, artificial warmth to them. He started asking more often about my wife. "How's she doing? It must be hard with your schedule, right? She's such a beauty. She needs attention," he would say with a smile that I initially perceived as friendly. But now, I wasn't so sure. All these things started piling up in my mind like drops of water dripping from a faucet. Each small detail seemed insignificant on its own, but together they created a strange picture I couldn't ignore. Then came that evening. She was in another room, talking on the phone. I was walking by and accidentally heard her laugh. But it wasn't her usual laugh. It was different. A laugh I hadn't heard in a long time, light and sincere. "He won't notice anything," she said, and her voice was filled with a strange confidence. My stomach tightened. Who was he? Who was she talking about? And most importantly, what wasn't I supposed to notice? I froze. Minutes felt like an eternity. I didn't want to believe this could be something bad, but her voice, her laughter, and those words, they wouldn't let me rest. I stood there in the dark hallway, trying to gather my thoughts, but I could feel the anxiety slowly flooding me. What was their secret? What wasn't I supposed to notice? My mind started to conjure up the worst scenarios, but I still hoped this was just my imagination. However, the feeling that something was wrong was now too strong to ignore. It was the beginning of the end, though I didn't realize it at the time. Sometimes we look for answers in complicated things, but the most painful truths often hide in the smallest details. In my case, this truth was hidden in a simple restaurant receipt. If you saw it, you probably wouldn't even pay attention to it. But for me, this piece of paper became evidence I couldn't ignore. It was an ordinary morning. I was tidying up our bedroom. It was a kind of ritual for me when my wife was busy. She had rushed out of the house again, calling just 5 minutes before to say her work colleagues needed her at an urgent meeting. She said it quickly, without even looking me in the eye, and slammed the door, leaving me alone. I was trying to calm my thoughts by diving into routine chores when my gaze accidentally fell on her nightstand by the bed. There, under the corner of her phone, something was peeking out. A small piece of white paper. I almost walked past it, but something inside me made me stop. I thought it was some sort of ticket or receipt, and when I picked it up, my heart sank. It was a receipt from a restaurant, but not just any restaurant. No, it was the restaurant where we had celebrated our last anniversary. The very same restaurant that was supposed to be our special place, a symbol of our love and the promises we had made to each other. The very same restaurant where I held her hand and said, "I will never betray you, no matter what happens." And now I was holding proof in my hands that this restaurant was no longer ours. The date on the receipt was from last week. The day she said she was working late. I remembered that evening vividly. I had cooked dinner at home, waiting for her, but when she came back, she seemed exhausted and didn't even look me in the eye. She had said she had a hellish day and went straight to bed. At the time, I didn't ask too many questions. But now, this receipt was asking all the questions for me. Reservation for 2. I read those words over and over again. The signature of my mentor at the bottom of the receipt was clear and sharp, like a knife stabbing me in the back. The dishes were expensive, the wine even more so. This wasn't a work meeting. This was a romantic evening. My hands began to tremble. I tried to collect my thoughts, but my mind was racing. Why were they there together? What were they discussing? And most importantly, how long had this been going on? My memories started forming a painful puzzle. I recalled the moments when she would suddenly disappear, explaining it away as work commitments. I remembered her phone calls, answered in whispers from the other room. I remembered how my mentor suddenly became overly interested in my personal life, asking about my wife. At the time, I had dismissed it as coincidence. But now, I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the receipt in my hands, feeling as though the ground beneath me was shifting. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that my trust had been betrayed, that my life, which I had believed to be so stable, was falling apart. Inside me, 2 emotions were waging a battle, anger and despair. The receipt became the catalyst that unleashed a flood of doubts. I could no longer deceive myself into thinking everything was fine. This was the beginning of the end, and at the same time the beginning of my plan. I knew I had to uncover the full truth, but I also knew I couldn't act impulsively. If they had chosen to play against me, I would know all their cards, and when the time came, I would make them regret everything they had done. My world was collapsing, but deep inside, another world was beginning to take shape, new, stronger. And now, I had a single focus, to uncover the truth and make my next move. Sometimes, to find the truth, you have to take extreme measures. I didn't want to do it. Even the thought of spying on someone I once loved with all my heart made me feel sick. But after finding that receipt, my doubts had turned into an obsession. I needed to know everything. I could no longer live in ignorance. in this unbearable uncertainty that was eating me alive. I thought long and hard about how to proceed. The idea came to me unexpectedly. We had recently talked about installing cameras in the house for safety reasons. She had initiated that conversation herself, saying she didn't feel comfortable being alone at home when I was away on business trips. I decided to use that to my advantage. I purchased a small hidden camera. It was so tiny that it was nearly impossible to detect. I installed it in the bedroom, explaining that it was for securing the house against possible intruders. She didn't even ask how the camera worked. She just nodded, seemingly unbothered. The following week, I accidentally received an urgent work call. It was my chance. I said goodbye to her, mentioning I'd be home late that evening. There was something in her eyes that I couldn't describe at the time. Was it relief? Or perhaps even excitement? I pretended not to notice. That day, I sat in my office, but my mind wasn't on work. I stared at my laptop screen, trying to focus, but I kept glancing at the clock. Time dragged on unbearably. Inside me, anxiety and curiosity were at war. I was afraid of what I might see, yet I desperately needed to know the truth. When I returned home that evening, she was the same as always, smiling, asking how my day had been. Her behavior was so normal that, for a moment, I doubted myself. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had imagined it all. But my doubts vanished the moment I sat down at my computer to review the footage from the camera. The first few hours of the recording were uneventful. My wife went about her usual activities. But then the door opened, and he walked in, my mentor. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel each beat in my chest. They hugged. It wasn't the kind of hug between friends. It was warm, intimate, and it lingered longer than it should have. Her head rested on his shoulder, and he stroked her back. My breathing became heavy, and my fists clenched. They sat on the edge of the bed. Their laughter echoed in the quiet room, like a blade cutting through my heart. They talked about me. He joked about how I had no idea, and she smiled, adding, "He's so easy to fool." Those words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I couldn't believe that the people I loved and respected could talk about me with such contempt. I watched them sit together, how she touched his hand, how they laughed together. At one point, he kissed her, and she didn't resist. On the contrary, she kissed him back. That scene was unbearable for me, but I kept watching. Every second of that recording felt like a knife cutting deeper and deeper. When the recording ended, I sat in the dark room, staring at the now black screen. Inside me, there was nothing but emptiness. The pain was so intense that I could barely breathe. But along with the pain, another emotion began to take root within me. Anger. I couldn't stay silent anymore. But I also understood that I needed to act wisely. They had been playing their game behind my back. Now it was my turn to start my own game. A game where I would always stay one step ahead. I had a plan that would make them regret everything they had done. This was no longer a game about love. It was a game for survival. And I wasn't planning to lose. Sometimes, to strike where it hurts the most, you have to let the person feel safe, confident that they are in control of the situation. That became the foundation of my plan. Instead of confronting them outright, instead of shouting all my evidence in their faces, I decided to make them trap themselves. They wouldn't even realize what was happening until it was too late. After watching the footage from the hidden camera, I spent several sleepless nights thinking about how to expose them in a way that would inflict maximum damage. The scene of their exposure had to be public, humiliating, unforgettable. The idea came to me suddenly to organize a dinner, a celebratory dinner that would become the stage for my personal triumph. I called my wife first. I tried to keep my tone as warm as ever. "Honey, I have great news. My mentor helped me land a big project, and now I have a chance to sign a contract with an international company. I want to celebrate this with both of you." Her response was quick and devoid of any suspicion. "Of course, darling. That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. The next call was to my mentor. I invited him to the dinner with the same tone, full of gratitude and respect. Your guidance has been invaluable. I couldn't have done this without you, so I'd like to thank you personally. His voice sounded pleased. Of course, this will be a great opportunity. I chose a restaurant they both knew well, but wouldn't expect. It was the same restaurant where I had found the receipt earlier. Symbolic, wasn't it? The place where they had felt safe and untouchable was now going to be the arena for their humiliation. Preparing for the evening was like a chess game for me. I thought through every move. I reserved a table in the center of the room where everyone could see us. I arranged with the staff to set up my laptop under the guise of presenting something for an important client. But in reality, it wasn't a presentation. It was the video. The same video I had recorded using the hidden camera in our bedroom. When the evening arrived, I put on my best suit and acted as if I was overflowing with happiness. Inside, I was torn apart by rage and betrayal, but outwardly I appeared to be a man who had just reached the peak of his career. My wife arrived first. She looked stunning, wearing her favorite dress, the one I had given her for our anniversary. She smiled, looking happy, as if nothing had happened. My mentor arrived a little later, also in an elegant suit. They exchanged brief glances, thinking I wouldn't notice. But I saw everything. We sat at the table, ordered wine, and made small talk. I pretended to be completely engrossed in the conversation, but every one of their smiles, every exchange of glances, only strengthened my resolve. They had no idea that their world was about to collapse. When we finished the main course, I stood up and said, "I'd like to share a presentation with you. It's a short video illustrating how we got to this point. It's my way of thanking both of you for your support." I turned on the laptop. At first, the screen showed clips from my work, a few slides with graphs that looked perfectly innocent. But after a few seconds, the footage changed. The bedroom appeared on the screen. My bedroom. They saw themselves. Their embraces, their laughter, their kisses. Their faces turned pale in an instant. A dead silence fell over the room. I sat calmly, savoring every second of their shock. They tried to say something, but no words came out. "This is just the beginning," I said coldly, looking them straight in the eyes. "I'm going to make sure you both remember this evening for the rest of your lives." Their game was over. Now it was my turn to play. It was the moment I had been waiting for, with a mix of anger, pain, and anticipation. All evening, I played the role of the loving husband and grateful friend. I laughed at their jokes, listened to their conversations, nodded along, but inside me, a storm was raging. Every one of their smiles, every glance they exchanged only fueled my determination to bring this charade to a grand finale. We sat at the table, surrounded by the lively chatter of the restaurant. People around us were celebrating their own milestones, laughing, raising their glasses. They had no idea that in just a few moments, they were about to witness a show they would never forget. When dessert was served, I raised my glass of wine and said, "Thank you both for always being there for me. This evening is special to me. And to make it even more unforgettable, I prepared a little presentation for you. It's not just slides. It's a video that shows how we've worked together and how you've helped me get to this point." Their faces lit up with satisfaction. They suspected nothing. My wife even smiled encouragingly and said, "You're always so creative." My mentor nodded and praised me for my attention to detail. Their confidence, their calmness, made this moment even sweeter for me. The restaurant staff turned on the screen, and the presentation began. At first, it showed ordinary clips, graphs, photos of my work, a few shots from corporate meetings. Everything seemed entirely innocent. They even nodded, approving my skill. But then, a few seconds later, the video changed. Instead of graphs, my bedroom appeared on the screen. Their faces froze instantly. The next shot showed them entering the room. Their embraces, their kisses, their laughter as they talked about me. At that moment, the entire restaurant went silent. My wife covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with shock. She tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. My mentor leaned forward, staring at the screen with a face that looked like he had just seen a ghost. His hand instinctively gripped his wine glass, but it slipped and spilled all over the table. People at neighboring tables started turning their heads. At first, it was just curious glances, but very quickly, they turned into surprise and even shock. Everyone was watching the large screen, unable to look away. He said calmly, "The whole evening, I had been like a volcano holding back an eruption. But now, as I watched their reaction, I felt a strange sense of peace. My mission was accomplished, but this was just the beginning." What is this?" my wife whispered, her voice trembling. My mentor tried to take control of the situation, but his nervousness was obvious. "This is some kind of misunderstanding," he said, though his voice sounded unsure. I didn't give them time to come up with excuses. I stood up from my seat and looked at them coldly. "Misunderstanding? That's your best answer? You laughed behind my back. You thought I wouldn't notice, that I was so naive I wouldn't see what was happening right in front of me. But you know what? This is just the beginning." Their faces shifted from shock to panic. They knew this was only the start. I reached into my pocket and pulled out another trump card. These were documents, proof that my mentor had stolen my ideas for his project. "Not only did you betray me, but you also tried to profit from my work. Now, I'm filing a lawsuit against you for intellectual property theft." The restaurant exploded with whispers. People were discussing what they had just seen and heard. They had become witnesses to a drama they would not soon forget. I turned to my wife. "You betrayed me in the worst possible way. But do you know what's worse? You don't even regret it. But now, you'll have plenty to regret." I walked out of the restaurant, leaving them in chaos. Their lives were just beginning to fall apart, while I was already moving forward, leaving the past behind. But this evening was one they would never forget. When you build your life on trust, and that trust is broken, the pain is unimaginable. But sometimes, that pain becomes your driving force. The betrayal by my wife and mentor became a source of strength for me. I was no longer just a wronged husband. I was a man preparing to strike back. And that strike was going to be devastating. Not only had I exposed their affair, but I also discovered that my mentor, the man I trusted with my ideas and developments, had stolen one of them. It was a project I had worked on for months, a project that could have changed my career and opened new doors for me. My mentor had pretended to help me refine the idea, but had submitted it behind my back as his own. I found out by accident. After the dinner where I exposed their affair, I went home and began carefully reviewing all our shared documents. I found his signature on a patent application he had submitted weeks earlier. It contained my solutions, my designs, my formulas, but it was all presented as his intellectual property. That was the moment I realized he wasn't just a betrayer. He was a thief. He hadn't only stolen my trust, but also what rightfully belonged to me. However, unlike him, I had always played fair. I had already filed a patent application for the same project a month earlier, but I had kept it secret while working out the details. Now, it became my weapon. My mentor was at the height of his success. He was preparing to sign a multi-million-dollar contract with a major company that planned to invest in this project. This contract was supposed to cement his reputation as a genius and secure his future. He had even boasted about it during our recent meetings, unaware that his triumph would turn into a disaster. I acted swiftly. My lawyer drafted an official letter stating that the patent for this project belonged to me and that any attempt to use these ideas would be considered a violation of the law. The letter was also sent to the same company with which my mentor was about to sign the contract. A few days later, I got a call. It was a representative from the company my mentor was negotiating with. They wanted more information, and I provided all the documents proving that the ideas were mine. Their reaction was swift. The contract with my mentor was canceled, and his reputation began to crumble rapidly. When he found out, he called me. His voice was filled with rage and desperation. "How could you do this to me?" he shouted over the phone. I remained calm. "I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself. I just restored justice." He lost everything. The company that once regarded him as a genius now saw him as a fraud. Other clients who had trusted him began to doubt his integrity. His name no longer inspired respect. It aroused suspicion. I learned that he started losing other clients. His income dwindled, and the project that could have brought him millions now belonged to me. I began working with the same company that had initially planned to partner with him. They offered me the contract, and I accepted. It was a financial and moral blow from which he would likely never recover. He could never have imagined how low he could fall, but it was only the consequence of his own actions. That moment became a symbol of justice for me. I not only reclaimed what was rightfully mine, but also showed him that betrayal and theft always come with the risk of losing everything. And now he had nothing. As for her, all her words, promises, and smiles that once seemed genuine now echoed with the bitter sting of betrayal. Her infidelity had left a scar on my heart, but it had also made me stronger. And now it was time to end this once and for all. I spent several weeks carefully planning every detail. My lawyers were already working on the divorce papers. I knew she was counting on us, overcoming this rough patch, because she always assumed I would forgive her. But everything was different now. My pain had transformed into cold determination. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. She was sitting in the living room, wearing the same robe I had once thought was charming. Her face radiated calm, as if nothing had happened. She smiled, got up, and asked, "Do you want dinner? I made your favorite dish." I looked at her and realized I felt nothing but indifference. All the warm feelings I once had for her were gone. I no longer saw the woman I loved. I only saw someone who had betrayed me in the worst way. "We need to talk," I said coldly. Her smile disappeared instantly. She sat back on the couch and looked at me with a hint of unease. I sat across from her and placed a thick envelope of documents on the table. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "These are divorce papers," I replied without emotion. Her eyes widened, and she began to say something, but I raised my hand to stop her. "You betrayed me. You destroyed what we built together. I can't live in this lie anymore." "It's not that simple," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with panic. "We can fix this. I made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. You know I love you." Her words sounded hollow. Every "I love you" felt poisonous. I had already seen her true nature and knew that she wasn't sorry for the pain she caused. She was just afraid of losing the comfort and stability I had provided her. "This wasn't a mistake," I replied. "It was a choice. You chose betrayal. You chose to humiliate me. And now you'll have to live with the consequences." Her eyes filled with tears. She grabbed my hands, pleading, trying to justify herself. "Please, give me another chance. I'll change. I'll do whatever you want. We've always been together. You can't just walk away." I looked at her coldly, without any emotion. Her tears no longer meant anything to me. They weren't tears of love or remorse. They were tears of fear, fear of losing everything. "I've already walked away," I said, slowly pulling my hands from her grasp. The divorce papers were clear. They left her with no financial security. Everything we had was earned by me, and my lawyers ensured she couldn't claim anything. This was justice. She grabbed the papers, quickly flipping through them, and looked back at me. Her voice turned nearly hysterical. "This is unfair. You can't leave me with nothing." You left me with nothing, I replied. You left me without trust, without respect, without love. Now you'll reap what you've sown. I stood up and walked to the door. Her cries and pleas echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. I knew that this break was final, and it was the right decision. Her tears, her begging, her attempts to win me back, all of it now felt distant and empty. She thought she could manipulate me, that I would cave again. But she was wrong. My pain had turned into my strength, and that strength allowed me to move forward, leaving her behind in the past. This chapter of my life was over, and while it was filled with betrayal, pain, and disappointment, I knew something greater lay ahead, something better, and now I was ready for it. It seemed as though the story could have ended with my revenge. But fate had other plans, introducing an unexpected and incredibly significant twist. It turned out I wasn't the only one betrayed. There was someone else whose trust had been shattered just like mine, and that person became my unexpected ally. It all started with a phone call. One evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. I hesitated to answer, but something urged me to pick up. On the other end was a woman with a strong, yet slightly anxious voice. "Hello, my name is Anna. We haven't met, but we have a shared problem. I'm your mentor's wife." My heart froze. I had only heard her name a few times in conversations with my mentor, but I had never met her. And now she was calling me to discuss what had happened. Her voice was steady, but I could sense the anger and pain that I knew all too well. We arranged to meet at a cafe the next day. When I arrived, she was already there. Anna was a woman with elegant features, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion and sorrow that couldn't be hidden. She looked up, and for a moment, our gazes met in a way that didn't require words. We both knew why we were there. "I found evidence," she began without preamble. "I always suspected he was cheating on me, but never had proof. Then I stumbled upon messages on his phone, and everything became clear." I nodded, listening to her. She explained how long she had doubted him, how she had scrutinized all his excuses until she finally gathered enough evidence. "And then I learned about you," she added. "I found your photos on his phone, where he was discussing your project, and I realized you were also a victim of his betrayal, not just in business, but in life." I shared my story, telling her about the hidden camera, the receipt, the video, and that fateful evening at the restaurant. She listened attentively, tears glistening in her eyes, though she tried to hold them back. "We were both betrayed by people we trusted," I said, "but maybe we can do something about it together." We decided to join forces. This wasn't just an act of revenge. It was a quest for justice. She had access to personal data and photos of the mentor that confirmed his infidelity. I had the video recording and materials proving his unethical behavior in business. Together, we decided to make their story public. Anna created an anonymous account on social media and began posting evidence, screenshots of their messages, photos from romantic dinners, and audio recordings of their conversations. I contributed the hidden camera footage and the story of how the mentor tried to steal my idea. Our post quickly went viral. People from all over the world began sharing them, discussing and condemning their actions. The comments were ruthless. "How can someone betray another person like this? This is a lesson for anyone who thinks lies will go unnoticed." My mentor and ex-wife couldn't escape the public eye. Their acquaintances, friends, and colleagues all learned the truth. Their reputations were destroyed. His business collapsed completely. She became isolated, losing many friends and connections who condemned her behavior. But that wasn't the end. Anna, like me, decided to start a new chapter in her life. We continued to stay in touch after this. Our conversations became a form of therapy for both of us, a way to find support in someone who understood everything without needing an explanation. Over time, we realized that this unexpected alliance was the beginning of something new. We had both lost so much because of betrayal, but we had gained strength, confidence, and ultimately the ability to move forward. Their reputations were ruined, but we began new lives, lives without lies, without deception, but with the belief that the best was yet to come. And this story became a reminder that even the most painful blows from fate can turn into new opportunities. Sometimes life seems to fall apart completely, but in those moments, we are given the chance to build something new, something better, something we never imagined before. What began as the darkest period of my life ultimately became its brightest chapter. I look back at the person I was before, naive, trusting, too dependent on others. Back then, I believed that the people you give your heart to will always stand by you. But now I know that's not always the case. Some people come into our lives to teach us important lessons, even if those lessons come through pain. My business, which once seemed unstable, now thrives. After exposing my mentor and reclaiming the rights to my project, I signed a contract with a major company that valued my idea. They saw me not just as someone with talent, but as someone willing to fight for justice. My income grew, and I began hiring new people, people who shared my values and believed in integrity. I've also learned to rely more on myself. Now I know exactly who I am and what I want to achieve. All the doubts that once tormented me have disappeared. In their place, confidence in my own abilities has taken root. I no longer seek approval from others. I'm creating my life the way I want it to be. My personal life also began to change. At first, I was afraid to trust people. My wife's betrayal left a deep scar, and for a long time, I couldn't allow myself to open up to anyone. But over time, I realized that not everyone is the same. I met new people who became sources of inspiration for me. People who value sincerity and honesty. Among them was Anna, the wife of my former mentor. Our paths crossed during the darkest time for both of us, but we became each other's support. Her strength and ability to move forward impressed me. Together, we were able to leave the past behind and find the courage to look toward the future. One morning, I stood on the balcony of my new house, watching the sun slowly rise over the horizon. The air was cool, and there was silence all around. In that moment, I realized that I was finally free. Free from lies, from betrayal, from the people who had once tried to drag me down. The betrayal that once seemed like the end of everything had now become my strength. I understood that it wasn't a collapse, but an opportunity to rebuild. In the end, their betrayal made me stronger than ever. Now my life is a new beginning. A beginning I created myself, free from the influence of toxic people who once tried to destroy me. This is a life with room for new dreams, for people who value me, and for opportunities I'm ready to embrace. The past remains the past, but it will always be a reminder of who I was and who I've become. And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing, because this journey is what made me who I am today. This isn't just a victory. It's a new start, a testament that even after the darkest nights, the dawn always comes. And I'm ready to embrace this dawn with open arms.